You are listening to Mining Stock Education, where you'll learn from the top leaders in the natural resource sector and uncover quality mining investment opportunities.
What I like to do is focus on or find stories that are not being covered by other newsletter writers, ideally.
Welcome back to Mining Stock Education. I'm your host, Bill Powers. Thank you for tuning in. If you'd like to engage the show and any content that I cover, feel free to email me at bill@MiningStockEducation.com. And if you've been listening but aren't subscribed yet, I would encourage you to hit that subscribe button. If you listen on a podcast app, I'd appreciate a review if this show has been of benefit to you. Well, my guest today has 20 years experience in journalism. For 10 of those years, he worked for the Vancouver Sun. But for the last 5 years, he's been writing a newsletter. He's the editor of Resource Opportunities since 2015. I'm talking about James Kwantes. James, welcome to Mining Stock Education. And as I referenced your background as a journalist, do you feel like that inquisitive nature of a journalist or some of the traits that you had as a journalist helps you as a newsletter writer in the mining sector?
Hi, Bill. Yeah, first off, thanks for having me. Yeah, I think so. I mean, the Sun newsroom, the Sun's the Vancouver broadsheet, and the had a big sort of bulletin in the newsroom, like question everything, And so I do think it's helped me on a couple levels. Like, so at the Sun, I was primarily an editor, actually. So we would for the front page, for example, we'd print off several versions of it between editions and pass it around for editors to mark up and so on. And so it's sort of the final quality control, so to speak. So I sort of come at it from a critical standpoint. And then the last few years, I was a part-time mining writer there. So they'd only give me 1 day a week to interview people and to write about mining. There's a fair bit going on in Vancouver, as you can imagine. So that as well forced me to really filter and focus on people who got things done and created shareholder value.
Do you think, being a former journalist, that it helps you to identify the narrative or the story, because companies put forth numbers, but they also tell a story? I mean, what do you think about what things jump out to you about a potential investment that maybe you could discern quicker than somebody else because of your background?
It's a good question, Bill. Funny, in this business, I mean, you have some companies that are just fluff and just fairy dust, but they sure know how to tell a good story. And then you have other stories that are actually quite good. But they don't know how to tell the story.
Exactly.
And you do need that. I mean, it's essential. This is not an efficient market, and you do have to get that story out in front of people.
So when you transitioned into this role, you mentioned you had 5 years of part-time experience covering the mining sector. Was that the initial part of your learning curve to understand this sector, or did you have any prior knowledge in the mining sector?
So I got interested in the stock market kind of along the way in my journalism career. And initially, my focus was not on mining or exploration stocks. So that was kind of a function of just being in Vancouver. It's such a big part of the economy in Vancouver. And then just hearing the stories and meeting people who are involved in the sector, and then you start investing in it. And so that's kind of how I got immersed in the mining and exploration sector. So it's kind of it was the intersection of my interest in the markets as well as the mining presence in Vancouver.
What is the angle you take, or what unique proposition do you give potential subscribers in your newsletter?
So what I like to do is focus on or find stories that are not being covered by other newsletter writers, ideally. Although I in the past, I haven't covered, good stories just because other newsletter writers who have covered them, and that's also, probably not the right course of action. But I like to think. So I have a hybrid model. I have 3 company sponsors right now, and then I have a paid newsletter as well. And I do think, what people get from me is like independence and sort of honesty. Like, I write about, I don't just write about the winners. I write about the losers, things that don't work out. I put out 3 newsletters in March, and one of them, the final one, was a blast on a coal royalty company. That was actually the first company I wrote about when I took over the newsletter, and had performed quite well over the last 5 years, quite steadily, especially compared to the volatile juniors. but they'd had some issues in the coal mine, which is in Nova Scotia, some rock falls and so on. And so the owner of the mine, which is a private U.S. company, abruptly shut the mine. So and it was a surprise to everybody, including this coal royalty company that I cover. So I sent out a flash alert on that, and talked about where things are at and where we might go from here, and sort of reading between the lines of the different announcements that were being put out.
You've been doing this 5 years. What would be the top pick that you could share with us your most successful pick thus far?
The classic newsletter style is to pick, where you picked it, and then cut off the chart at the highs, the all-time highs. But I don't really, I don't know. I don't fool around like that. So next gen, Lawrence picked it when it was at 30 cents.
And Lawrence was the predecessor, the editor before you.
Lawrence Rolston. Yeah, he founded the newsletter. So he was writing about it from 30 cents, and I think it was at 45 cents when I took over the newsletter and continued covering it, and that ran to about, it was about 450 at some point, but it's just been absolutely hammered, right? It's been trading in the low 90s, and only recently, like this week, it's sort of perked up. I think it's at about $1.30. So that's one that comes to mind. And then like a good example is Sabina Gold and Silver.
Mm-hmm.
They've got a large high grade gold deposit up in Nunavut. So I picked up coverage on them in the bear market in 2015. And I did it because Bruce McLeod took over as CEO. And so I was, familiar with Bruce and some of his accomplishments. He's built mines in the north before. And it was one of those situations that you come upon in bear markets where there's just a total disconnect between the fundamental value, or what's in the ground, and the share price. So that one's again has done well, but it's down considerably from the highs. And they ran into some permitting issues a while back.
When you cover in your newsletter, how have you been advising your subscribers through this last month of just really unprecedented occurrences?
I would say by like my temperament is more sort of buy, hold, and watch closely. Like I'm not so much a trader, but I've been more active than usual in the last few weeks, just because you get these washout days,
mm-hmm.
just like the rush to liquidity, and things just got stupid cheap. So what I did is I shed some of the, I shed a few sort of leftover stocks, or kind of dead juniors that didn't work out, these things that build up in your portfolio. And I kind of went up market, and initiated coverage on some companies I've been following for a while, but were, that wanted to get it at a better price. And then I also added to, some pretty solid companies that I was already covering. So that's kind of that's the approach I took.
So when, just to fully understand what you mean, did you jump into like producers and royalty companies rather than the early stage explorers? Is that kind of where you reallocated money?
Yeah, like no producers, but yeah, a couple royalty plays. The royalty plays, I don't know, like the royalty plays were Sandstorm and Altius.
Mm-hmm.
They both got pretty cheap. And then I bought some mag silver near the lows just for silver exposure.
So did you get that 83% gain in a day that I saw?
I don't know, like on mag, mag doubled within days.
Yeah.
Like it's in a retirement account, so I just held onto that one. And as far as the other two, I like I said, I don't. I viewed it as a an opportunity to upgrade my portfolio basically. And I also added to a couple juniors, but quite solid juniors with with a lot of money and very active drill programs.
Do you incorporate technical analysis at all into how you go about speculating?
Not really. No, not formally. I mean, I kind of you get a sense for charts after a while, but no, I'm not really a technical analysis guy.
So when you look at a new, let's say, early stage exploration play, what are going to be the first few things that you're going to look at to see if it passes the initial smell test?
I mean, everybody says people, but obviously people and what they've done in the past is very important. Because you get people who are serially successful. Some of them are like the Ross Beatties and Lucas Lundins and so on. And sometimes you'll pay a premium, to follow the stocks that those guys are involved with. But there's other people who are less well known, than those guys, but who have also been very successful in the past. So I would say people in this kind of market, like cash, is really important. So I did an interview at PDAC and I said just companies with cash and ounces in the ground, right? Because you do not want to, you don't want to finance that in a market like this. If you can do it, great. But it's crazy how I followed, you follow juniors with a fairly tight share structure, and they do a couple of financings in a market like this, and it's incredible how quickly the share structure blows up.
How positive are you on, let's say, the second half of this year? I mean, do you have a positive perspective on precious metals and the gold sector, or are you more cautious?
I'm pretty positive. Part of it's, and I'm not talking about the juniors. I think we'll see. I mean, we'll see, but I'm not super positive on the junior end of the market. But I think the good developers, the royalty companies, and then the producers. Like, I'm pretty positive. Like, I think it just seems like we're heading into a perfect storm for gold and precious metals.
Mm-hmm.
And we haven't really seen it in the gold price yet, but I think we will. And it really feels like it's just a matter of time.
What about trends? You're a journalist, so with those observation skills, what trends are you seeing both within the mining sector that investors should pay attention to, and any trends even within the type of subscribers that are now subscribing to resource opportunities?
So one trend on the as far as subscribers and people following the space, it's a pretty gray-haired crowd, and has been historically. And so you've got a lot of older investors, who have participated in some of these bull markets in the past. And then you have like a whole group of younger people who only see pain when they look at the junior mining or the mining sector, because that's how it's been for the last the last 10 years really, with a few interludes. And so but I think there's the conferences I've been going to, like, there's more young people. You have platforms like CEO.ca, which tilts younger. So I do think young people will move in, particularly when they make the link between how important mining is and all the gadgets and all the things that they use on a day-to-day basis. So I think once you start to see the market pick up, particularly in the junior sector, and some wins, then I think it'll sort of increase the money flows, because people will see that this is a sector where you can make some good money in.
You referenced CEO.ca, which is a mining chat room. How do you utilize a chat room like that?
Yeah, in a few different ways. So I have level 2 on CEO.ca. You can subscribe to level 2, so real time bid asks. I use that when I'm trading or active. That's pretty essential if you're having level 2 if you're active. The index used to be fairly high quality, and it's sort of kind of degenerated into conspiracy theories and a lot of politics and so on. So, which is kind of unfortunate. But so I use the company channels. One very valuable tab that I use is the Insiders tab, which is kind of a real-time assessment of what insiders, buying and selling by insiders.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's something that I follow quite closely, especially coming through the kind of period that we've been in. I can't remember the quote, but there's something about like show me what a leader does during a crisis or whatever. And so one way to look at that from an investing point of view is, what are they doing with their money? And so Altius, for example, Andre Gaumond, who's a director there, and some of your listeners are probably familiar with him. He's kind of a Quebec exploration legend who found the Eleanor deposit and sold Virginia Mines to Goldcorp.
Mm-hmm.
And then he held on to the royalty on that, and that sold or became part of Osisko Gold Royalties. So very, serially successful guy, very sharp, and he just started buying Altius with both hands and spent, as far as I can tell, about $300,000 buying the public market, like since the beginning of February. So I look at that, and that's, to me, that's a pretty strong signal. Now you have to be careful, because a lot of insiders have more money than you or I do, so that's one consideration. And insiders also tend to be early, and that was certainly the case with his purchases. But insider buying in particular can be a valuable sort of barometer.
Yeah, as they say, you can sell for a lot of reasons, but you buy for only one reason, because you think the stock's going higher.
Yeah. In a past life, I used to blog for INK Research, which is a subscription-based company that basically tracks insider buying and selling. So I wrote a blog for them about what the mining guys are doing with their money.
So James, as we kind of wrap it up here, what is the opportunity for potential subscribers over at Resource Opportunities? What more can you share?
Sure. Well, if you for people who subscribe to my newsletter, you're going to get ideas that you won't see elsewhere. I have the three sponsors, but I consider myself, I disclose my conflicts. Consider myself pretty independent. And being around this sector for a while, first as a journalist and then as a newsletter writer, you really do get a feel for management teams and people, and sometimes it's just kind of a matter of talking to the right people, being in the right place at the right time to get opportunities that that you won't find elsewhere.
And the website is resourceopportunities.com, and there's also a free email list if you want to get on James's free email list, as well as find out information of his subscription service. James, I appreciate you coming on Mining Stock Education today. Thank you for joining me.
It was great. Thanks, Bill.